Hey everybody, welcome back to the Engineered Angler. Today we're going to actually keep working on one of these swim baits. Now if you'll remember a couple of videos ago, I worked on figuring out what tail on a soft swim bait is going to work best, or at least which one do I like best. And I asked you guys the same question. Which one do you like best? I did test them all in the water and did some side-by-side comparisons of similar tails. Now, most of you guys really liked either the traditional boot tail or the combination of a fin and a boot tail, a boot fin, but some of you liked the ball tail, and I did too, and a few of you thought that the lug tail actually had a cool action. It's a tight little wiggle, almost like a little bit of a vibration. And I think it's probably the most realistic fin action out of all of them. So that's what we're gonna do. We're gonna make a reasonably realistic looking soft plastic swim bait with a lug tail. Let's go to the whiteboard. And that little dotted line is a lateral line, and I want to sort of highlight a lateral line somehow, and we'll get to that a little later. But when I design my lures, I typically want to design them around the hardware I tend to use, whether it's an internal harness or just some sort of rig with hooks that I'm going to use externally. Now on this one, I'm going to be using this belly weighted wide gap hook. It's a 4/0, and I want to embed it in this lure. Typically the soft plastics this is used with are narrow enough that the point comes out and you just sort of slightly embed it at the very top just to make it weedless. And this one, I want the whole thing in the body, and I want to have slots in the body top and bottom so that this thing will actually expose itself when it's actually bitten. Go to set the hook, it compresses the plastic, and you should be able to get a good hook set. Now, to ensure that I get the dimensions correct, I went ahead and put the hook on the copier and made a copy of the hook itself. And then I drew out the lure shape, more or less how I'm going to make it. This way I know exactly where to put those slots by knowing where the hook is going to be. So let's draw the hook in. So with the hook positioned more or less, we know that we're going to have room for the hook itself up here and room for the wide gap to push up. So it shouldn't be too bad to shape this and get those slots in there, but it is going to be a little bit weird for making the actual silicone mold. So I'll have to think about that a little bit and plan it out. This section of the tail here is going to be just a flat piece of Lexan, 1/8 of an inch thick. And then the lug portion, the sort of heavy part at the very end, I'm going to make out of a dowel, just like I did on the original one. And I'm going to make this out of a piece of white ash. And I milled this wood from a tree that had fallen in the wetlands on my property about a year ago. And talking about fallen trees, I just want to mention that these last 3 weeks have been pretty brutal here in Florida, and of course up the eastern seaboard a bit. Folks in North Carolina and Tennessee and northern Georgia have really got hammered with these hurricanes, and we have not been spared too much either. This area here, we've been really lucky. I've just lost limbs, I've got high water, and I've spent a lot of days just prepping, getting the generator ready, getting all the stuff ready on the house to make sure it's all protected. And I'm one of the lucky ones. So I just want to say to everyone out there who's been affected, I wish you absolutely the best. And I hope that all of your stuff gets recovered. I hope your insurance company pays off. And I hope you're not too uncomfortable in these days. All right, let's get started. All right, I'm going to start off by gluing the drawing onto the piece of wood with just some Elmer's spray-on adhesive. Now, it doesn't have to be stuck on there that great. This is just so it doesn't move while I'm cutting it. And we'll trim off the excess. We're ready to cut. Alright, let's put some guidelines in. That'll help me center the slot and get the tapers right. And I want the tapers front to back to be pretty much symmetrical. So I'm just going to hand sketch a taper here. And I'll do that again on this side and for the bottom as well. And that'll give me a good indication on whether I'm getting pretty much the taper I want. Doesn't have to be perfect. There's going to be a bunch of sanding to do. And I'll refine it with my sanding and my shaping, but that looks pretty good. And while I still have some nice square sides to work with, I'm going to go ahead and work on these slots just a little bit. I just want to set where the end of the slot's going to be, because that's where the hook is sort of going to butt up against. So I'll mark a spot to drill a hole, and that'll be the front edge of that slot. I had to deepen the very far back there because that's where this is actually going to come up. So if you can imagine the hook sliding up, you can see where I have to have space way up in here for that hook to go up in there. So this little Dremel tool really comes in handy for this. I'm going to keep working on it a little more to make sure I've got plenty of space for the that belly weight. And because this hook has to go through this front part of the lure here, it'd be tough to run it through hook first like I normally would. So I'm going to go ahead and drill a little port with a 16-inch bit, and this way I can cast that port as part of the actual lure. And this hole actually joins in with the slot and the bottom of the first hole I drilled. And now I'm going to take the slot down about as deep as that red line I made. All right, that looks pretty good. I just got a little bit of sanding to do just to smooth things off, but I really like these slots. I still got to put a slot in for the tail. All right, now it's time to get on the sander here and shape this down to these contour lines that I did. All right, now I've got the contours from front to back more or less right, and now I'm basically taking off a bunch of material along the hard corner on the bottom, and I haven't done it on this side yet, but I'm taking it up about halfway up, and then I'm going to round off the top. So it'll be bulkier on top than on the bottom, but it will have a nice sort of natural fish shape. So I'll get back to you after I've got it shaped and done some finish sanding. All right, I've got it sanded down nice and smooth, and I've got this slot. Went ahead and connected the top slot and the bottom slot way in the back. I really want that hook to move nice and easy and get exposed on top. So next I want to go ahead and drill the eye sockets so I can draw in what I want to carve out. And with the eye sockets in place, I went ahead and drew out the little gill plate details that I'm going to carve. And I'm going to carve that in a little while because I'm really sensitive to caffeine, and I had a double shot espresso at lunch, so I don't really want to handle a razor blade right now. In the meantime, I need to cut out the little tail section from a piece of plexiglass, and that's what this is. I just coated it in masking tape. And I'm just going to glue this on there because all I really need to cut out is the back end of it. And I think even with the jitters, I can handle a bandsaw. All right, I'm going to give this carving a try, and hopefully I can spare you the carnage. Yeah, whenever wood comes off in a nice little flake like that without splintering out, it's a good wood to be carving on. Comes out in little thin coils. Alright, so I'm pretty happy with the carving. It's just a simple little gilt plate carving, but pretty happy with it. And it just occurred to me that I haven't really explained what I'm doing very thoroughly. For those of you who are lure makers, you probably already know, but what I'm doing is making a master lure. This is a lure that's going to be basically the plug that you put in a mold. It's the master in that it's not going to be a lure, it's just going to be what I make a mold of so that I can then make soft plastic lures in that mold. So what I'll do next is put a clear coat on this to protect the surface so I don't get any dings and dents in it, and to give it a nice glossy finish so it'll give the soft plastic a glossy finish as well. And I'll do that off camera because just putting a clear coat on isn't very interesting. But I want to show you a little trick I want to try to have 3D eyes that don't fall off. So usually on soft plastic lures you have a 3D eye that's just glued on there, usually with just like crazy glue. But they're just easy to knock off. But I have an idea for eyes that are actually going to be able to hold themselves into the plastic. So I'm going to take a piece of wire that is 0.57 millimeters. It's a 108 pound test of stainless steel leader wire. And I'm just going to take a pair of pliers and put a tiny 1/16 L in it. Hopefully you can see that. Then I'm going to go up about 1/4 of an inch and bend it again, but this time I'm going past 90, so I create like a little hook. And then I cut off the excess, so I end up with this little tiny double bend. And then I take the eye I'm going to use, set it down upside down, put a tiny droplet of UV resin, and then I set the square bend on the glue, and I put some UV light on it. And that takes about 5 to 10 seconds to set. And now I've got an eye with its own little anchor. So I'm going to need to make a few more of these. It goes pretty quick once you get going. To make the lug for the tail, I take this dowel and just cut a flat spot by splitting it a bit. And then I'll cut it to length. And then I can take it to the vise and start cutting a slot in it. This is where the Lexan tail will fit. It's got to be wide enough and deep enough to hold. That's about right. A little more trimming and I can glue it in. And I'm using the UV Cure epoxy for glue. I'll fill in the top and the bottom and then run a bead down the edges between the plastic and the wood. That gives it a nice transition. And the UV light sets it in just a few seconds. Alright, this thing should be ready to go. Oh yeah, that looks really good. It's got a nice sheen to it. Now that I've got this guy complete, I can go ahead and assemble these two. And that's just going to be a matter of using a little bit more UV resin as glue and gluing these two together. So I'm going to go ahead and glue this thing and we'll be ready to make our mold. I mentioned that I wanted to have some sort of lateral line. Well, this is how I'm going to do it. I'm going to use these foil scales. I make these foil scales with these scalloping shears, and if you haven't seen it, check it out on this video that I'm linking above. The scales are cut into strips, and I just need to cut enough so I can cover the part of the lure that I want to cover. So I'll get back to you when I've already done the work. Alright, there you go. It's got a little half jacket of scales. Hopefully that'll show up on the soft plastic. I'm not sure it will or not. It's kind of subtle. And this took me 1 hour and 8 minutes. I actually timed it. So it's a little bit of a investment in time, but for a master, I think it's worth it. So this means we're ready to start with our mold, and we always start with the clay bed. I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail on mold making. I've done other videos for that, and you can check those out here, I guess. So the idea is we'll embed the lure into the clay about halfway down, about to the slot of the mouth. And that means I've got to dig out a bunch of clay. So I've outlined where the lure is going to be, and I'm just going to start digging out clay. All right, well, we've got it embedded in the clay, and it looks a little bit like a mythical sea monster with all this stuff on it. But that clay is just the sprue. That's where I'm going to pour the soft plastic into. And those pieces of wire, they're going to be vents, and they're made from solder. With the top half of the mold box pressed in place, I can then measure for the interior volume of the box, so I know how much silicone to mix. So I did a quick calculation of the volume I need, and I think I got enough left of the silicone rubber to do the first half out of these bottles, but we'll see. It's just a matter of mixing this up really thoroughly. I've got plenty of time to do this. This thing has a mixing time of about 30 minutes. All right, I've got it pretty well mixed up, and I'm going to go ahead and use a spoon to sort of drizzle in some in between the slot down there to make sure it gets full and doesn't trap a bunch of bubbles. All right, so with that full, I'm going to go ahead and just pour it in from one corner in a really thin stream, try to minimize bubbles. And it'll be probably about 5 hours before I can actually pull this apart and get ready to pour the other half of the mold. All right, it's nicely set up, or appears to be anyway. And if I pull this stuff out of here, you can see that, but it's really the thinnest little layer coming out. So when that's set up, you can be pretty sure the thick stuff's set up too. And while I was waiting for this thing to set up, I realized I had forgotten something, and that's the alignment keys. I normally would put some sort of sockets or little depressions in the clay, and that forms alignment keys when you pour the silicone in it, but I forgot that. So hopefully that's the only thing I forgot. I don't remember what else I might have forgotten. Let's see if I can pull out these little vents. Okay, and then we just need to get the clay out of here. There we go. Alright, we're going to have a little bit of a problem here. The silicone I poured in the slot actually poured in and around and behind it. So this is going to be a little bit of recovery mode here. I'm going to have to do a little bit of surgery on the silicone, but I think I can make this work. I'll just have to remove the silicone enough so I can pull the master out of here and then do the remainder of the trimming with the master removed. So now you can see all this excess stuff. I'm just going to slice it so it's pretty much flush with what we have there. All right, to make little divots for alignment holes, I'm going to use this stainless steel tube and just sort of gouge out some alignment holes, maybe 2 here and 2 here. I won't be able to do too many because this is going to be a little rough to do. So what I'm going to do is use this little honing stone and sharpen the edge of this so it's really sharp. I'll push the slug out, and all I have to do is cut that so it's about half that length, and then shove it back down in there, and I've got an alignment hole. So I just got to do that maybe another 4 or 5 times. All right, with the master back in the mold, I'm going ahead and put a bunch of Vaseline on everything. Well, not on everything, on just whatever silicone is exposed, making sure I get all my alignment holes well lubricated. Got to lubricate those holes. It looked pretty dismal for a minute there, but I think we have recovered. And maybe we'll get a good clean mold out of this thing. You know, this slot might still be the end of us because there's a lot of material going down in there, and I'm afraid it's going up underneath the lure itself. All right, nothing to do but to do it. Oh, that's the problem. It's pouring out of the bottom. Oh no. I knew there was something fishy. How can that be? Oh shoot. The clay plug fell out of the bottom. Let's see if we can make one. get it to stop leaking. Oh, this is a disaster. Absolutely disastrous. Alright, a true mess. Let's see, before I mix any more of this stuff, if I plug the hole. Doesn't look bad. We may have pulled another one out of the hat. I have to say, this is the biggest mess I have ever made, making a mold. But you know what? Whenever you have the camera rolling, all bets are off. If this actually works, I'm gonna buy myself a beer. Well, that's how not to do it. When you have a mold that's kind of an oddball kind of mold that isn't your typical style, I like to write out the steps and make sure I don't miss anything. This time I got cocky, did it off the top of my head, and I paid the price. We won't know if we actually recovered until tomorrow morning. So I'll see you guys bright and early. Well, good morning. It's another day, and I actually thought of something when I was trying to fall asleep last night. I realized I screwed something else up, and if you look in the video, you'll probably pick it up. But when I took the blank or the master out of the silicone to work on the silicone, and then I put it back in, I put it in the wrong way. It was supposed to go in upside down, and I put it in right side up. So I don't know what's gonna happen. Probably this is not gonna be usable, but maybe best case scenario, we get scales on both sides. I don't know. Let's open it up and find out. I don't know if you ever had one of those days where you turn one little mistake into an avalanche of screw-ups. Hopefully we don't repeat that today. All right, there it is. And here's that plug I had to shove back in there. All right, let's open it up. Let's see what we got. It didn't really open very neatly. I had to use a razor blade to cut a little bit of stuff that was stuck together. And the result was, well, about what I expected. There were some weird flaps on the inside where the master really didn't align. But we did have some nice scales formed in there. Pretty nice, but the bad news is the scales kind of came off of the master. Well, there's nothing left to do but to clean up the mess and try again. And I'll try to spare you the repetition of watching the whole process again. So I'll get back to you when I've got a new mold that I think will work. Alright, so after 2.5 attempts to make a mold, I finally have one that looks like it's going to work, and maybe we'll get some nice swim baits out of this thing. And look at all the silicone I ended up having to use. So this mold is ready. Got a nice sprue, plenty of volume there, and I've got the little pin that's going to form the little hole that the hook eye kind of slides through. And it's chilly in here, so I'm going to go ahead and heat this up in the microwave and get it nice and warm. Maybe we won't have shrinkage issues. So the color scheme is going to be a mud minnow color scheme. So dark brown on top and a kind of a pale gray brown on the bottom. And to place the eyes in the sockets, I'm just going to dab them a little bit with some Vaseline. And just drop them right in the socket. And we're ready to pour the first color. The light pearlescent color for the belly. A little messy this time. I'll get better at it. And now we'll inject the dark color for the top. Alright, I think it's cooled enough. Let's see if we got a decent pour. Got a little bit of flash, a little more than I really was hoping for. And I'll slice off the excess sprue material. Alright, that looks pretty good. The eyes are nicely placed. Just need to remove some of this flash and make a few more. We can get down to the lake and give it a shot. But first we need a hook. To rig the hook, I run the point through the slot in the back, and then I take the eye and shove it through that little hole I made. And you can see it extends way up above the body. It's ready to go. Gotta say, it looks really good in the sunlight. Let's try putting it in the water, see what it looks like. Looks good. Well, thanks for sticking with me through this tough build. Hopefully it was worth it for you. If you want to see me actually do some real fishing, you should go ahead and click on the video here to my left. Alright guys, I'll see you next time.